Okay, our speaker today is Terry Coates. He's a former policeman, retired, and I'm sure he's going to give you an interesting perspective on these two well-known gang members. Terry?
Thank you. I had been on the police department maybe a week or so, and I was driving in East Nashville. My partner and I were going down Russell Street, and we drove past this building at 711 Russell Street, and he said, "Jesse James lived there." And I said, "Bull." I was wrong. He did. And in retrospect, I think I may have even known this because I had just, as I said, I just gotten out of rookie school. Without near the Tucker out of Tucker Road, where the police academy is, there was another building out there that the James boys lived in, and I think somebody had already told me that, so maybe I didn't know, and I'm just getting the story all messed up. Anyway, can we hit the lights a little bit, Tracy? I bet you can't guess what the presentation's called. Okay. 3 days after Christmas in 1841, 16-year-old Zerelda Elizabeth Cole married Robert Sally James. A few months after their marriage in Stamping Ground, Kentucky, Robert James and Zerelda moved from Kentucky to Clay County, Missouri. Let's see if I can get this thing going. There's Mom and Dad. They moved to Clay County, Missouri to start a new life. Robert had just graduated from ministry school and ministry college, whatever one would call it, and was a pretty prominent minister, real dyed-in-the-wool, hell-come-built type of minister, I understand, and had a real good following. They moved to Missouri because he was a farmer on top of being a minister, and they owned some slaves. He owned a hemp factory, or a hemp farm rather, that made ropes, and ropes were pretty prominent at this time. They moved to Missouri to be close to Zerelda's mother and her mother's second husband. At the time of their marriage, Robert was just finishing his ministerial services at Baptist studies at Baptist-affiliated Georgetown College, and was already gaining a reputation as a full-life evangelist minister. Well, this is my wife's computer, and I can't get it to work. Let's see. Come on. Darn. Oh, there it goes. Okay. Robert left Zerelda with his mother-in-law and returned to Georgetown back to Kentucky to finish up his last studies. He graduated in the spring of 1843 with a Bachelor's of Art degree, including studies in Latin and Greek. To this marriage were born 4 children. Alexander Franklin, called Frank James in 1843, Robert R. James in 1845, who died at age 1 month, Jesse Woodson James, named Jesse by nickname, 1847, and Susan Lavinia James, who was born in 1849. The surviving boys would go on to become two of America's most notorious outlaws and Nashville residents, Frank and Jesse James. Life was rough for the new couple in Missouri, but shortly before the birth of Frank, the United States Congress enacted a protective tariff on hemp and other rope-making materials, making the crop a real money-maker for the farmers wishing to grow it. Robert had experience in growing hemp in Kentucky, so it was a natural step for him to establish a new cash crop in Clay County. Soon the family's fortune turned for the better. With the improvement of the financial fortunes, Robert purchased slaves to work his growing empire. Until the discovery of gold, with the discovery of gold in California, Robert left his family and bustling congregation at New Hope Baptist Church to travel across the country to bring the gospel to the 49ers and to possibly strike rich in the gold fields himself. Regrettably, Robert contracted pneumonia or a fever and died on August the 18th, 1850, leaving Zerelda a widow with his 3 children without a father. Zerelda remarried. in 1852 to Benjamin Sims, but this marriage dissolved in 1854 because the Sims disliked Frank and Jessie and were cruel to them. Zarelda married for the third time in the fall of 1855 to Dr. Reuben Samuels, a slave owner and tobacco farmer who, to this marriage, were born four step siblings to the James brothers. Although through the Missouri Compromise of 1820, Congress kept a tenuous balance on political power between the North and the South. As most of the settlers to this new territory had migrated from the southern states, they brought with them the propensity for southern ways of life. Missouri joined the Union in 1821 as a slave state. Contrary to those in Missouri, settlers in the Kansas territory were mostly free state mindset. For several years leading up to the war between the states, border conflict between the factions between the states of Missouri and Kansas got so deadly that it became known in history as Bloody Kansas. And the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 called for the popular sovereignty, that is, the decision about slavery has to be made by the settlers rather than from outsiders. So volatile was the feelings at the time that many of the residents in Missouri moved to Kansas in an attempt to influence the political decisions. The area between the adjoining territories did not wait for the impending Civil War to come before hostilities erupted. As early as 1856, raids between Missouri and the Bushwhackers and the Kansas City Jayhawkers escalated to a series of reciprocal atrocities committed by both sides. This was an atmosphere from which the formative years of the James brothers developed. With the coming of the American Civil War, the James Samuel family sided with the Confederacy. 18-year-old Frank James joined the local group of guerrilla warriors, pledging to protect his home state of Missouri from the abolitionist invasions. In May of 1863, a company of Union make sure I'm on the right slide. In May of 1863, a company of Union militia raiders raided the Samuels' home looking for the members of the group, a member of the group, which was Frank, who had ridden with them for the last 2 years. The Samuel family declined knowing any whereabouts of their son. Not accepting this answer they received, the Yankees tortured Reuben Samuels by briefly hanging him from a tree in the yard. Additionally, they drugged 16-year-old Jesse from the house, tied him to a fence, and whipped him. Jesse would never forget the lashing he received at the hands of the federal troops. In the latter years, Mr. Samuels would recount the incidents by saying that that the commanding officer had told her, Miss Samuels, told her, now that we're going to take your husband Reuben out and shoot him. Afterwards, they let him over. Afterwards, we'll let the hogs eat him. They rode over the hill, taking Reuben with them, and she heard several gunshots. I did not know whether the 3 or 4 days were the doctor who was not alive or had been killed. The home guard had simply fired into the air, making her believe that they had shot her husband. Unbeknownst to her, they had taken him to the county jail in Liberty, Missouri. The soldiers then pointed guns at the heads and threatened to kill me too if I did not tell him where Cortrell was, but I didn't know. This was still a quote from Mrs. Samuels. Although the hanging did not kill Dr. Samuels, the lack of oxygen affected his brain, and he was never practiced medicine again after the incident. At the time of the Yankee raid on the Samuels home, Frank had been away serving with a group of partisan rangers under the leadership of the notorious Confederate William Clark Cortrell. In August of 1863, it was thought that Frank was a participant along with Cortrell's party when the raid was made in Lawrence County, on the Kansas border town of Lawrence, Kansas. Lawrence was a hotbed of anti-slavery sentiment, and part of the hostilities, men had arrested and detained wives and sisters of some of the Cortrell's men, including the sister of Bloody Bill himself, Bloody Bill Anderson, and a cousin of Cole Younger. Later, a member of the famous Cole Younger, later a member of the famous James Younger Outlaws, who I'll talk about in a few minutes. The women were being held on the upper floor of a women's prison when the building collapsed, killing them. The death of the women was used as one of the excuses for the raid that would become known as the Lawrence Massacre. So influential was the Quatrail Association, with the Quatrail Association, that they estimated later that approximately 82 members of the James Younger gang who had floated in and out over time, 44 of these members were members of the Quatrail partisans. In the summer of 1864, 17-year-old Jesse joined, I may be afraid I've got it. Well, yeah, I'm one slide ahead. In the summer of 1864, 17-year-old Jesse joined his brother in the Confederate service. Within months of his enlistment, Jesse suffered the tragedy of being shot in the chest. The following spring, after riding under the flag of truce, Jesse was shot in the chest yet again. While in the hospital, he was trying to surrender, and they shot him again. While in the hospital, he was treated brutally by these captors and forced to swear allegiance to the United States. The war ended while he was in recuperation. Pardoned, Jesse was moved just outside of Kansas City to his uncle's house, John Wilson Mims boarding house, where he would recover from his wounds. During Jesse's convalescence, his 19-year-old first cousin, Zerelda Amanda Mims, saw to his administration and his nursing needs. Z, as she would be called, and Jesse took a fondness to one another and dated for the next 9 years. Go figure. They married in April the 24th of 1874. After regaining his health, Jesse returned to Clay County, only to find his mother and stepfather, along with most of the neighbors, in dire strait. Determined that he would return his family to the pre-war status, Jesse turned to the only way he knew how to make money. His years of riding with Quatrail as a bushwhacker taught him well to rob and pillage. The Republican Reconstructionist, former Yankee, and former abolitionist would be his targets. Between the end of the war in April of '65 and the end of the decade, it was been debated as to how many brazen robberies Frank and Jesse participated in. But one thing is for sure: during this time, the two became two of the most notorious, famous persons in American history. The first robbery to bring major notoriety, thank you, to the James, I wrote this, I don't know how to read it, would take place on December the 7th, 1869, when the Daviess County Savings and Loan Association in Galeen, Missouri was robbed. Little money was taken in the robbery, maybe no more than about $700. But Jesse killed the bank manager, a man named John Sheets, during the robbery. Jesse misidentified Sheets for a man named Samuel P. Cox. Cox had been responsible for the death of Bloody Bill Anderson during the war, and most likely Jesse killed the man he thought was Cox in revenge for that killing. Added to the story was the robbery was the fact that Bloody Bill's brother was the third member of the hold-up team. After the robbery, Frank and Jesse made a daring escape, riding straight through the pursuing posse. So dramatic was the robbery that the death of Sheets and their escape that Frank and Jesse's names were printed in the newspaper. This was the beginning of a noted and notorious career. Everything ratcheted up several notches for the James brothers after the Galeen robbery. Missouri Governor Thomas Crittenden declared the brothers as outlaws, a term that had never been used in American history. Additionally, John Newsom, Edwards, editor of the Kansas City Times and former Confederate soldier, saw Jesse as an implement to further the campaign of returning former secessionists to power in Missouri. Realizing that the target of his raid and the robberies were Republicans, Edwards began printing letters addressed to him by Jesse, as well as going so far as to declare Jesse innocent of all the crimes in which he had been involved. At about the same time, the James brothers partnered up with Cole Younger and his brothers, John, Jim, and Bob, as well as other ex-Confederate raiders, to form the James Younger gang. This gang was responsible for the robberies as far east as West Virginia and as far south as Texas. Up until July the 21st, 73, they had robbed banks and stagecoaches. On the next date, they added a new wrinkle to their repository. In Adair, Iowa, the gang detained a train on the Rock Island Railroad, robbing the express car in excess of $18,000 in cash and about $5,000 in gold dust. At this point, they had a new start in Nashville. In the decade following the war, Jesse and the James gangs were responsible for some of the most notorious robberies in the country, with several robberies in the country. With several robberies and several murders accounted to them, Jesse James was a household name when it came to the definition of the word bandit. The James brothers were the most wanted men in America. In the first months of 1875, Jesse and his pregnant wife, Z, moved to Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville was a perfect place for Jesse to hide. It was away from the Missouri Governor Crittenden, who had issued a dead and alive warrant, and it was just 40 miles from the home of Frank and Jesse's uncle, George Height, who lived in Adairsville, Kentucky. And incidentally, that house is still standing. It ain't in good shape, but it's still standing. I'll talk about it in a little bit. It was only 40 miles from his home of Frank and Jesse's uncle, George Height, who had lived in Adairsville, Kentucky. Jesse and Frank had visited Nashville on several occasions as they raced their horses here at the fairground track located in today's Centennial Park. Additionally, Jesse had come to the city in June of 1867, where he remained for 3 weeks under the care of a renowned former Confederate surgeon, Dr. Paul Eve. How many of you are familiar with the movie Forrest Gump? You know what Forrest had his little finger in every pie. We need to write a book on Dr. Duncan Eve. This man is the Forrest Gump of the 1870s. He was trained in France under the tutelage and paid for by Napoleon. He was a renowned Confederate surgeon. He dressed the wounds of Jesse James. When the big train wreck happened in 1918 at Dutchman's Curve, which I want to come back and talk on, thank you. He was the doctor for the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railway and signed all 101 death certificates. So I'm going to write a book on him. He treated the wounds that Jesse had sustained 2 years before. Mostly the move to Nashville from Clay County was an ongoing hunt by the Parkinson Detective Agency, whose agents had doggedly pursued the brothers and had gone so far as to firebomb the Samuels James home place while searching for the brothers. On January the 25th, 1875, a large contingency of Pinkerton Angels rode up to the Samuel James home. Let's go one more. Rode up to the Samuel James farm, thinking that the outlaw brothers were being held up in the house. They hurled an incendiary smoke bomb in the window. Archie Peyton Samuels, the James's 7-year-old stepbrother, and their mother Zerelda were in the family, and a family's manservant were in the living room area of the house when the firebomb broke through the window of the kitchen. Archie, thinking that the bomb had been a stick that had rolled out of the fireplace, picked it up and threw it back in. The incurring explosion killed the boy and also mangled Zerelda's right arm so bad that it had to be amputated. It was a smoke bomb would have gone off if he hadn't thrown it back in the fire, which influenced the thing to go off. The incident became a terrible public relations mess for the detective agency. The detectives had missed their targets, and then the news of the Pinkertons' malicious attack on the James family was printed in the newspapers. Supporters for the outlaw deepened among the citizenry. Upon his arrival in Nashville, Jesse assumed the alias of John Davis or Dave or Thomas Howard, while Z took on the moniker of Josie. The Howards moved into a small farmhouse at Did I only have it there? No, no. Well, where is it? Did I go past it?
Yeah, we passed it.
That's it. This is the house they moved to on Bosco Street. Howards moved to a small frame house in 606 Bosco Street. After their arrival at the residence was born James's firstborn, Jesse Edward James, who in public they called Charlie or Tim. It would be only after the death of his father in 1882 that Tim would ever discover his real name. And if you notice the boy's middle name, Edwards, he was named after the newspaper editor that I was talking about before. John Howard told his neighbors he was a wheat speculator, a story that seemed to be acceptable for a while. It can only be assumed that the Howard's neighbors thought it strange that Mr. Howard seemed to be staying away from his wife for an extended amount of time. After the wheat speculator rouge wore thin, the family vacated the Bosco address and moved to a boarding house on Summer Street, 5th Avenue North, presently the location of TPAC, operated by Ms. Rich Kent. Jesse may have moved to Nashville to gain a new identity and to keep one step ahead of the law, but he did not stop his roguish ways. On one of these extended trips, it was later said that he had traveled to Chicago with the express purpose of murdering the longtime menace Alan Pinkerton, the man who had been responsible for the murder of his stepbrother and the severe wounding of his mother. Jesse's life would take a turn when on September the 27th, 1875, Tom Webb, one of the James Younger gang members, was captured in Fentress County, Tennessee. At his capture, over $4,000, some of it is still blood-stained, was found on his person. The money was part of $15,500 taken in a bank robbery in Huntington, West Virginia on September the 6th. Jesse, always overly cautious about being captured, and was thrown into panic when he learned that Webb had been arrested and not 100 miles from Nashville. The James family immediately left Nashville. Jesse and the one-year-old son, Jesse Jr., named after Jesse's friend, the newspaper editor, Major John Edward, would next be found on the rolls of the city directory in Baltimore, Maryland. Any success, and now I've got them all out of mess. There it goes. Any success the James Younger gang may have gained over the years was dramatically reversed on September the 7th, 1876, when 8 members of the Younger James gang rode into Northfield, Minnesota. For about 2 weeks, the men had rambled from small town to small town, scouting out which bank and from which town to exhibit was the best candidate for them to rob. They decided on the First National Bank in Northfield, Minnesota. As per their plan, 8 men divided into 3 groups. The first group of Jesse, Frank, and Cole Younger rode into town and entered the bank. A second team of 3 men was to stay just outside the bank to cover the front. The third team waited just outside the town on a bridge. This 2-man team was to guard the escape route for the group after the robbery in case things went as they had planned went wrong, and it certainly did. Moments into the robbery, things went really, really bad. Inside the bank, the teller, at the peril of his life, refused to open the vault, telling the robbers that it operated on a time lock. The truth was that the vault was unlocked all the time. Outside, a customer attempted to enter the bank. Instead of capturing the patron, throwing the man inside and quieting him, the gang member allowed him to escape, to run through the town, sounding the alarm that the bank was being robbed. Upon hearing the alarm, citizens who were not already armed ran to the nearby gun store, arming themselves and using weapons to enter into the gunfight with the fleeing robbers. The robber lasted a mere 7 minutes and netted the Younger gang group $26.70. In the wake of the robbery, 2 Northville citizens were killed, including Joseph Haywood, the bank teller who had refused to open the safe. Gang members Bill Stiles and Sel Miller lay dead in the street. Cole, Jim, and Bob Younger were shot to pieces and would be wounded again during a capture at Lake Hosca, Minnesota, as the posse pursued them. Gang members Charlie Pitts would be killed at the same Lake Hosca shootout. Frank and Jesse would be wounded in Northville but escaped back to Minnesota because they split up with the Youngers before the capture was during the shootout. Northville would go down in the annals of history as one of the greatest of fiascos and destroy the James Younger gang forever. J.B. Woodson and J.D. Howard moved back to Tennessee. After the attack on Northville, the James brothers made their way escape by going west through the Dakota Territory and eventually turned toward the Midwest. History has lost the account of their whereabouts for about a year, but it is speculated that the brothers may have gone back to the home of their uncle in Adairsville, George Hyde. In August of 1877, the brothers came out of hiding and crossed into Tennessee. As the Jameses approached the Tennessee-Kentucky line, they separated. Jesse relocated to Waverly, Tennessee in Humphreys County. James went to rural north in Nashville. Upon Frank's arrival with his wife, Ann, he took up the alias of B.J. Woodson and applied at a farm of Ben Drake at Whites Creek Pike, in the Whites Creek area. After 1 week, they moved to the home of Harriet Ledbetter, Ben's widowed sister. Later, he arranged to rent a rental of the Jocelyn Watson farm, but he could not take possession of the farm until January the 1st of 87. He remained at the Ledbetter's home through all the fall. In 1878, and up to some point in 1879, Frank rented the Watson place, and later the Felix Smith place. And this is the Smith place. This house was still standing when I got out of rookie school in 1973. It was still, so I think it was raised maybe 3 or 4 years later, but it was still standing. And this is what I was talking about. I think I knew that house was part of the James gang before I got down to the Woodland, to Fallen Street that day. Both located in Whites Creek and the Clarksville Pike area, and the Jefferson Hyde place located on Hyde's Ferry. He farmed the Watson place, but did not farm the Hyde place, choosing instead to log the property for a term of a few months. During this period, Frank worked as a teamster, driving a 4-mule team for the Indiana Lumber Company. It seemed for a while that both Frank and Jesse attempted to put their checkered past behind them and had every ambition of going straight. Frank had sought honest employment in the farming and logging in Nashville, and Jesse was attempting to portray himself as a country gentleman in Humphreys County. In February of 1878, while still in Waverly, Z gave birth to 2 twin boys named Gould and Montgomery James, after the 2 doctors who had helped deliver them. Unfortunately, the two children who only lived about a week before they died of natural causes. Though he had tried to put on airs, Jesse attempted to gentrify was not going well. Jesse was a prolific gambler and rang up a great deal of debt betting on cards and horses in Waverly. To cover his gambling losses, he had borrowed heavily and had entered into some scrupulous deals attempting to repay the debts. When he and Z left Humphreys County, not only did they leave behind 2 babies, but Jesse had also left a stream of debtors and unsettled debts, lawsuits. So protracted were these lawsuits that some of them would not be settled until 1882, long after the Jameses had left this state. In the summer of 1879, Jesse made a trip to Santa Fe, New Mexico, to investigate the prospects of relocating there, or at least to put up some mileage between himself and his creditors back in Tennessee. He may have even attempted to raise a new gang. In the end, he moved himself and his family to Whites Creek and resided in the same house with Frank and the family. It can be verified that Jesse and Z were in Davidson County by July the 17th, 1879, as the records show that on that date they became the parents of a daughter, Mary Susan, who was born in the Felix Smith house on Whites Creek. Frank's health began to fail him in 1879. With him growing physically unable to continue logging and with Jesse attempting to establish a new life after the debacle in Humphreys County, the two men applied for work at the Lambert Mocker Barrel Factory in East Nashville. This photograph was made around September of '79, and the factory depicting the Mocker and his employees. The photo could be considered almost a family affair for members of the James gang, including in the photograph with Jesse, Frank, Bill Ryan, Dick Lytle, and three more members of the gang, two of which were also distant relatives to the James boys. In November of 1880, Jesse and Frank had a falling out. Frank's Whites Creek Pike residence was always a beehive of activities with friends, gang members, and other relatives buzzing in and out. On one occasion, some of the guests attempted to burglarize the house for one of Frank's neighbors. Frank was furious over the incident. Frank told Jesse he was welcome to continue to live there, but it was clear that the other gang members, like Bill Ryan, were no longer welcome because he and his involvement in attempted burglary and because of his hard drinking. Jesse took umbrage to Frank's condemnation of Ryan and decided that he and his friends were not welcome there, he wouldn't be either. So Jesse, Z, and the children moved back to Mrs. Kent's boarding house, again up where T-Pack is. This was the same boarding house that they had occupied in '77, the first time they had lived in Nashville. Their stay with Mrs. Kent was short-lived. In December of 1880 or January of 1881, the family moved to a residence at 903 Woodland Street. A short time after moving to a 903 Woodland Street address, Jesse and Z changed residences one more time. Between January and March of '81, they moved to a federal-style red brick house at 711 Fallen Street. The rent on the house was $8 a month. Sometime after, Frank and Ann also moved from their Whites Creek home and established a residence at 814 Fallen Street, just 2 blocks away from his brother. Although it seemed that Frank and Jesse had all intentions of establishing a reputation for honesty work, and they had moved to Edgefield, Jesse had a harder time parting with his errant ways. Since the fiasco in Northfield, all the younger brothers were wounded and in prison. So in the fall of 1879, Jesse was forced to form an entirely new gang. The ruffians consisted of Tucker Balsam, Frank Ryan, Dick Lytle, Wood Height, that's his cousin, and Ed Miller, brother to Sel Miller, who had been killed in the debacle at Northfield. On October the 8th, the band of robbers was responsible for a daring double robbery in the town of Glendale, Missouri, and of the Chicago and Alton Railroad train as it pulled into Glendale. Initially, the gang had thought they had made a haul of over $60,000, but it turned out much of the contents of the strongbox was non-negotiable securities, and the actual split was a little over 1/10 of that amount. Over the next 23 months, Jesse and some configuration of the association would succeed in the implementation of 5 more robberies. On September the 1st, 1880, Jesse and Bill Ryan robbed the stagecoach near Mammoth Cave, Kentucky. A month later, Jesse, Bill Ryan, and Dick Lytle attempted to rob a mining payroll of a company in Mercer, Kentucky. They missed their payroll and only netted $13 from the company's safe. On March the 11th, 1881, Bill Ryan, and one of the other Jesse Heights cousins did better in a robbery of a federal payroll of $5,200 in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. The robbery was successful, but with deep negative ramifications. 2 weeks to the day later, Bill Ryan was on his way out of Nashville, stopped at a bar located at the corner of Whites Creek Pike and Knight Road as he was trying to get out of a heavy rainstorm. Ryan, no stranger to drink, got drunk and shot off his mouth about being a member of the Jesse James gang. Ryan started banishing 2 revolvers, waving them in the air, and as he talked into the, he also talked he was also talked into laying the pistols on the table by some of the patrons. At that point, W.L. Earthman, a Davidson County constable, and James McGinnis, proprietor of the grocery store bar, pounced on the drunkard, wrestling him to the floor and arresting him. On the following evening of March the 26th, 1881, the Nashville Banner reported that on the incident reporting the arrest of a Tom Hill. Dick Lytle, realizing that Tom Hill was the same man as the gang member Bill Ryan, rode into Edgefield to meet with Mr. Howard and Mr. Woodson. Lytle, Frank, and Jesse, feeling that their arrest might be imminent, decided to leave town. Frank had his own horse. Jesse and Dick borrowed a couple of horses in the middle of the night to make their getaway. Later, the two would say they would have asked permission to take the horses, but, it was the middle of the night, so they took off without it. I don't understand it, because Jesse always had a horse and saddled and ready to go somewhere. I don't understand why he didn't have a horse at this time, but anyway. The James brothers were also able to live in Nashville. The James brothers had been able to live in Nashville for a second time, unmolested by the law, for just over 3.5 years, August of '77 to March of '81. But the rest of Dick Ryan, almost in their backyard, had been too much to call. The boys again ran to the protection of their uncle's farm in Aylesbury, Kentucky. In a 1930s article in the Nashville, Tennessean paper, Frank would state, "My first purpose was to protect my life, was to be able to support my family, and secondly to get shut of those parties who were around me." The house at 711 and 1814 Fallen Street would be the last Nashville arrests attributed to the James brothers. When Frank and James left for safer surroundings, they left Z and Ann and their families behind in 2 respective houses on Russell Street. Frank and Jesse hid out in the state of Kentucky for some time before moving back to Missouri. After that time, in the Show Me State, they called for their wives to come and join them. Jesse and Z settled in Kansas City, Missouri after visiting some relatives in California. Jesse took on the alias of T.J. Jackson while he and his family checked into the Doggett Hotel in Kansas City. Frank and Annie likewise visited relatives in Texas before returning to Missouri. Frank would have been happy to have sought an honest vocation in Tennessee, but under the circumstances was forced to join the latest rendition of the James Gang. On July the 15th, 1881, the Jameses hit once again. The men learned that twice a week Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad brought several thousands of dollars in cash in Farmers Exchange Bank in Gaylene, Missouri. During the robbery, one of the bandits shot and killed the conductor, William Westfall. It was said that the shooter, probably Jesse, thought Westfall was going for a gun. Additionally, during the robbery, a passenger named Frank McMillan slipped out of one of the back of the cars and was shot and almost killed during the attempted escape. The robbery only netted $700 instead of the thousands that they had expected to net. Once again, the James brothers had chosen the wrong train and not carrying the bank deposit. On September the 7th, 1881, 5 years to the date after the botched robbery in Moorfield, Minnesota, and just a mile from the site of the Glendale train robbery of the fall of 1879, the James brothers executed the last robbery in a location known as Blue Cut. In the gang this night was Jesse, his cousin Woodson, and Clarence Height, Dick Lytle, and a new member of the gang named Charlie Ford. Frank did not participate in this robbery. Once again, he was determined to attempt to walk the straight and narrow. Upon his departure from Nashville, he gave his wife directions to go to the former Confederate General Joe Shelby to see if Shelby would negotiate a pardon for Frank and the Missouri Governor Crittenden. By the last week of December, the James gang was in complete shambles. Mistrust and animosity was so bad that Dick Lytle and Wood Height got into a gunfight, resulting in the shooting death of Wood Height. 1 month later, Frank Ford, terrified that Jesse might kill him, met with Missouri Governor Tom Crittenden and Clay County Sheriff Henry Tremblay during a meeting. Crittenden offered $10,000 each, dead or alive, for both Frank and Jesse. On Christmas Eve of 1881, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Howard, later known as Jesse and Z, entered into a rental home atop a hill in Lafayette Street in St. Joseph, Missouri. On the morning of April the 3rd, 1882, brothers Bob and Charles Ford entered the James home. Jesse turned to straighten a picture on the wall. Bob shot him, killing him instantly. Zorella came running out from the next room to find her husband bleeding out on the floor. Jesse James was dead at the age of 34. And that's a picture, well, it's not that's a picture of Jesse James at death. Frank turned himself into the Missouri authorities on April, what am I doing on time? Frank turned himself into the Missouri authorities on October the 5th, 1882, and after being tried 3 times, was acquitted of all charges in 1885. Charlie Ford, afraid that Frank would hunt him down and kill him, moved from town to town and changed his name several times. Unable to outrun the stain of being the involvement in Jesse's murder, he committed suicide in 1884. In 1891, Bob Ford, the coward that shot Mr. Howard, was gunned down in a saloon in Colorado. Z. James, despondent over her husband's murder for the rest of her life, died in 1900. She was buried in the James Samuels family plot next to Jesse. Jesse Edward James, son of Z and he's in this picture. Jesse James and Z went on to be a prominent attorney in California. The twins born to the Jameses in Waverly were disinterred in 2002 and moved to lie next to their parents in Kersey, Missouri. Mary Susan James married Henry Lafayette Barr on March the 6th, 1901. The Barrs had 4 children, 3 sons and 1 daughter. Harrietta unfortunately died at the age of 7 months in 1913. In 1901, Dr. Archie Samuels, never the same after being partially hanged by the hanging that he received at the hands of the Yankee troops in 1863, was committed to an insane asylum. He died in the asylum in 1908. His wife, Zorella James Samuels, died of a heart attack in 1911. This is a picture that my wife and Jane went and made when we visited the home. Frank James would team up with, Frank went back and lived with his mother, and they charged 50 cents to go visit the house. And then people would come by and hit this stone here and chip off a piece of it because they wanted a piece of Jesse James's thing, so they finally just moved Jesse. Jesse was buried here, but they moved him over to the city cemetery with the rest of his family there. Frank would outlive them all. After the robberies, all the shooting, he died of natural causes on February the 18th, 1915, at the age of 72. During his time, Freshie and James were active as bank and train robbers. The two, along with some of the combination of men organized into gangs, netted over $268,000 in ill-gotten gains. This is the picture that I started with. The James brothers would come to be associated with several properties during their time in their tenure in Nashville between 1975 and 1881. There are several locations associated with the James brothers that no longer exist. Including in this list would be the Kent boarding house. Of course, T-Pack taking that place. The Varnell stables, originally located at 700 Fallen Street, was where Jesse stabled his horses and where he several assorted pool halls and restaurants that the brothers would have frequented during their time in Nashville. One of the main attractions that originally brought Frank and Jesse to Nashville was their love of horse racing. During their tenure in Nashville, both brothers owned and frequently raced horses in the Nashville Blood Horse Association racetrack, which was established in 1824 and demised in 1884. The track was located in the present-day Metro Center off of Rosa Parks Avenue. The original house that Jesse and Zerelda occupied in 1875 upon being first moved to Nashville and located at 606 Boswell Street. This house was razed when the United States government built the St. James A. Casey homes in the 1960s. The house at 903 Woodland Street, where Z and Zelda and Jesse moved after they relocated from the Smith house in November of 1880, was razed several years ago. This property is now a parking lot to an adjacent building. The Joshua Watson Place was located at the intersection of Kings Lane and Drake's Branch Road. It was here that Frank first resided after coming to Nashville. The house was located was the location of the birth of Frank and Annie's son, Robert Hamilton, in 1887. Robert Franklin in 1887. This house has been long since destroyed. The Felix Smith house atop the rise west of Hamilton Road, where Jesse's daughter was born and where both Mr. Howard and Mr. Woodson resided under the same roof, was raised in about 1977. The house at 814 Fatherland Street, the house that Frank moved to after coming from Whites Creek, and the last house occupied by the outlaw, was been replaced over time with other structures. Today there is no 814 Fatherland Street, so don't try to find it. I don't know. There's just no street number there anymore. The small cabin located between Waverly and New Johnsonville, Tennessee, in Humphreys County, was replaced with another house after the Jameses vacated the property. Today the land is vacant. In 2004, the graves of the twins were moved from Waverly to reburial with their parents in Kersey, Missouri. There is a historic marker there where the house was. There are 5 houses, structures still associated with Frank and Jesse James or the James gang that still stand. At the corner of Whites Creek Pike and Knight Road is the McGinnis Saloon, the site where the rest of the gang member Frank Ryan on March of '81. There is a Tennessee historical marker at the location to commemorate the incident. On adjacent property of the store still stands the James McGinnis house. Mr. McGinnis added on a shotgun-style house using the money paid out as a reward after the capture of Ryan. Today, the grocery store saloon is a boutique, and the McGinnis house is a private residence. They still stand. The house, the Jesse Height house at 3111 Hydes Ferry Pike. This property is where Frank and Jesse's family resided together after James and Z moved from Waverly, and the farm on which Frank logged for a few months before moving to Edgefield still stands. As of this writing, which was January of 2017, the house is undergoing an extensive renovation. During our visit that Jane and I went out to see it in December of 2019, we found a beautiful restoration of this private property. It is a gorgeous piece of property now. That's the one up in the left corner. In Waverly at 375 Highway 13 North still stands the Nolan House bed and breakfast. That's this one down in the lower right-hand corner. This is a bed and breakfast. Jane and I stayed there one night. I will not recommend it. We stayed there in January. It was colder than kraut, and this, I guess I shouldn't carry tales, but this guy hadn't dusted the place in 20 years. Dust literally was 3/4 of an inch thick in the place, and breakfast wasn't too good that morning. We were supposed to stay 2 nights. We stayed 1, and she said, "Let's get the hell out of here." So,
which house is that?
That's this one. It's a bed and breakfast, but I wouldn't recommend. I guess I shouldn't say that, but I won't recommend it. And this house sits right above, on top of the hill from where the levee happened in Waverly when L&N blew up the tank cars down there. Probably a little bit more, and that place wouldn't have been there because that fire got burned off part of the top of that hill as well. And that's my presentation. I have one P.S. I have a cousin. I won't name his name, for obvious people to protect the innocent. This is a picture that my cousin, he is a cousin of the Jameses. I am not a cousin of the Jameses, so I am a cousin to him. This is a picture this morning, and that Patrick, and I'll name his first name, has in his collection in his safety deposit box. He swears that this is a picture of Jesse James that was handed down through his family. I believe him to the health. I believe him that is a real picture of Jesse James. It is in his lockbox, and if it's real, it's worth $2 or $3 million, I guess. I cannot force him. I cannot get him to move to get somebody to negotiate that thing. This is a picture of Jesse James that was made just before he joined the Partisan Rangers. This is a split picture using Patrick's side and that side. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Jesse James had his jaw was sideways like this. If you look there, you can see that his. I think it's he. Honest to goodness, I think the boy's got a $2 million picture that he's got in a lockbox. He's had some police forensic people that looked at the thing and they said it's real, but I can't get her to move on. I want part of the money to this. Shameless fun here. I am an author of a book called Next Stop on Grandpa's Road: The History and Architecture of Nashville Chattanooga Railroad, depots and terminals. I have to put my hands there when I say that. That is my presentation. I did write, if you're interested in a synopsis of what I just told you, a national retrospect, and I'm sure all of you are aware of what that is. In February of 2018, what I did here was written up in this article as an article here. I love to write. I had the story behind this, and we were staying at that bed and breakfast at the time this happened. I'd written a 5,000 or 6,000 word essay on what you just saw, and I called up the guy that's the editor of the retrospect. What's his name? Falcon. I knew he, I'm a friend of mine. I'm Wayne.
Tom Henderson?
Yeah. After I got through writing the thing, I called him. I said, "Oh, by the way, how long is this article can I be?" And he said, "Oh, about 1,500 words." I said, "Oh, God, I've written a 5,000 word," and I love to write, but I hate it like crazy to take away my stuff. So I had to edit the thing down. We finally edited it down to about 2,500 words, which was in there. Most of my research came from this book. It's called Frank and Jesse James: The Story Behind the Legend by Ted P. Yateman. Yateman was a resident of Nashville. This is an absolute marvelous book. I just marvel at the amount of information, of research the guy did put into this book. If you're interested in a lot more extended survey of what I just told you, that's the book. I'm done.
Do you want to take questions?
Yes. Oh, I'm sure. I'm not. She said I was a historian. I'm not. But I'll answer what I can.
There used to be common, I mean, people would say that Frank James was a clerk for a while at the Andrew Jackson Hotel. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know. Never. I don't think Yateman ever said anything about it anyway. So.
Yeah, that opened in 1925 in the Jackson Hotel.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, what was the hotel that they blew up downtown?
That was it.
That was Andrew Jackson? Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Have you ever seen the movie The Long Riders?
Yes.
It's great.
Yeah.
They had 4 different actor families playing the different brothers.
The thing about I didn't mean to.
Well, and the music was Rock Hooter, which was wonderful, and it had a great episode of that Northfield bank robbery in it. Yeah.
The thing about all the movies and all the books that you've ever seen, nobody ever says a word about them living in Nashville.
Yeah.
Never. I mean, we've got movies going back to the 1940s with, about the James, and they never say a word about living in Nashville. I had, who knew? Yes, anybody else?
I grew up in Castellan Springs, and at Wynwood, which used to be a stagecoach inn, they have a book that has the signature of the James brothers. They stayed there apparently briefly, coming maybe from Kentucky to Nashville.
The other thing about the Hyde House, Patrick, the guy that's got the photograph, took Jade and I up one Sunday after we saw the photograph that afternoon. He took us up there. That house is still standing. It is a two-story house. We got there on Sunday after church. Friday afternoon, the lady that owned the property said that she was out working in the yard. She heard this tremendous crash, and the second floor of that building had just collapsed into the basement of the first. It's still there. But some people wanted to get it and move it and refurbish the thing and make it into a bed and breakfast or something, but it was just way too far gone. But it's still standing.
Yeah, there used to be a story at Merchant's Restaurant about Frank James being there or a bullet hole in a wall or something. Have you ever heard anything about that?
You know, there must be 1,000 stories about things. We live in Gillisville, and everybody comes around and says, "Oh, Frank robbed the bank here in Gillisville." No, they didn't. They never did. There must be 1,000 stories about working at the hotel and bullet holes. I don't know. Maybe you need to call Mr. Yateman because he's a lot more authority on this thing than I am. I copied from him.
Okay, you got another question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And just in reference, it was interesting to see some of the correlation in names that you were talking about, because a while ago when I was crowd surfing, had hit upon, I guess, the movie Long Riders, and had recognized Jesse and Frank James and the other brother. But it was very interesting that in the movie, and it was done, I guess, in the 70s, so it was the sort of realism type stuff. But the scriptwriters made it clear from the characters that when Jesse and Frank James and the other gang members were robbing the banks and stuff, as long as it was just money, they could get sort of like a Robin Hood effect.
Right.
But there were one and there were two scenes. The first time they shot and killed people, that began to change the tide of them being able to hide out, how far they'd go, and who's after them. And it was interesting that in the movie, a couple of the brothers said, "No, what are you doing? We can threaten, but once you've done that,
Yeah.
the law and the tide of the populace is going to change on us," which they depicted, and which I've sort of read did. They weren't just sort of outlaws, all of a sudden they were murderers.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to see that depicted, that perception.
Yeah. A lot of the notoriety they got was from Colonel Edwards, who was a friend of theirs that wanted to build them up. Even after the murder in Missouri up there, the first time they killed somebody, he was always on their side, always building them up through that newspaper. Any other questions? Yes.
There's a movie in which Tim, that is Jesse Jr., plays Jesse.
Yeah.
Is that an early silence or?
It is.
Was that right? Yeah, I'm sure they've been making movies since early teens, silent movies and stuff like that.
Since about the first commercial film, I think was like 1903, made by Edison.
Well, thank you very much, Terry.
Thank you.